Okay, you guys have spoken again in the comment section and in the poll, which has had more time to get more votes in. And I think you guys want the 15 plus 10. Now, we could even mix it up. But anyway, the climb to 2200 rapid continues. We've got a Slav Defense. Awesome. We played it a couple times in the last episode, and got some nice positions out of the opening. It didn't quite go to plan in every game, but you can check that out if you haven't seen it already. And okay, we've got a semi-slav. So the semi-slav is an interesting line because, we build this typical pawn triangle, but we don't have our bishop out yet on either g4 or f5, because I think bishop f5 here, for example, you can run into some big problems after queen to b3. It's not good. It's not good. I think it's kind of playable, but you're just worse. So, yeah, you can get away with it depending on what white does, but I don't think you can in that particular position. So here, we have the long-term plan of trying to get this bishop into the game. So, really, we either need to fianchetto the bishop and play c5 to bring it into the game, or we need to somehow play e5 and bring the bishop to g4 or f5, right? Both plans work in different positions, and both plans are completely viable. So firstly, obviously, we're going to develop this bishop and we're going to castle, and we need to decide how we want to do that, because bishop d6 is the more active option, of course, but sometimes white can go e4 and there can be threats of e5 if the bishop is on d6. However, the bishop on d6 can also support our own pawn coming to e5. So there's often cases where white plays e4, not yet obviously, after something like bishop d3 or queen c2. White executes e4, and we play something like take, and e5 supported by the bishop, which can be quite nice. So let's go knight bd7. So the knight supports the e5 and c5 squares, and let's get castled. Our rook will likely come to e8 to give even more support to the e5 break. Taking is interesting. Really? So, I would argue this is a slightly dubious approach from white, because by trading the pawns like this, it solves our problem of our light-squared bishop, right? We now don't have to break in the center. We can just develop normally. Clearly, white is trying to play pawn e4, which I don't think we can really stop. But after pawn e4, something like take, knight f6. Maybe not knight f6, maybe bishop g5 is strong in that position. But I think that we must be better if e4 is played, because white has the isolated queen's pawn. So if this trade happens, the d pawn is isolated and it could be quite vulnerable. Pawn a3, okay. That feels like a strange move. I mean, okay, no, I mean, he's going for the minority attack, clearly. We could try pawn a5 to prevent pawn b4, which is an option. We could also not do that. We could play a move like, I don't know, knight f8 and bishop g4, and maybe bring the knight to g6. We can put the knight on b6, but it feels a little bit misplaced to me, because we're not really looking to break on the queen side. Like, I don't want to play c5, for example, because then I get the isolated queen pawn after something like take. It can be playable, but I don't think it's that good. We do also have the option of knight to e4, preparing knight d to f6, stopping e4 forever, which looks very good. Also, that prevents b4, because you just lose the knight. If knight to e4, you also can't take, because then I fork your minor pieces. If you take with the bishop, well, then I have the bishop pair. And also, your knight has to go to d2. I can play f5 or knight to f6. And that just looks very good to me. So I think knight e4 is the way to go. I was very surprised to see pawn a3. I was expecting e4, because if white's going to go for this setup, I thought that e4 had to be played. Okay, well, let's support the knight. We could even play bishop f5 if we want, although maybe we're stepping into potential tactics in the future. White still can't really take. If you take like this, then you again get your minor pieces forked. b4 is played. Now the knight is defended. So if I take, queen takes... Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't feel amazing. b5 is a very annoying move, so I feel like we should play a6. However, if a6, knight to a4, trying to get to c5, is that an issue? I don't know, maybe. So perhaps we should be taking and then bringing the knight to e4. If this trade happens, I think we're much better, because we're just going to slaughter white on the king side with the bishop pair. Yeah, we probably should just be winning there. I think we should take... Of course, bishop h7 isn't a move. Let's go knight to e4. Again, taking feels completely wrong to me. But even if white doesn't take, he's got to move his queen, of course. So let's say queen back to c2. Yeah. Well, he's still not threatening to take, because I'll just take back with the rook. I mean, or even the pawn to try and kick this knight away if I want, which could be strong. And bishop g4 looks like a good move. I suppose maybe he wants to play b5. So perhaps I should play a6 first. And I mean, this bishop can't help the defense because the e3 pawn is in the way. And coming to b2 isn't particularly scary. So I think a6 makes a lot of sense. Just stopping the pawn from advancing. And now a4 can't be played to go b5 because, of course, the b4 pawn hangs. If rook b1 is played to prepare a4 b4... Sorry, a4 b5. Maybe that's the way to go. Bishop b2, okay. Potentially trying to play knight to e5. Supported. If knight e5, we can always go pawn f6. Which just kicks the knight. And this diagonal is fine. You can't break this pawn because you can't play e4. So that's not really an issue. So bishop g4 looks quite strong to me. Because if h3, take, queen g5, check. Maybe not even queen g5 check, but something else. I don't know, it looks pretty lost to me. Actually, yeah, here, and here. And if you take my knight, then I'll take king here, bishop here, and that's a forced mate. Or is it? No, f2 is defended. I probably have some kind of win. Let's go bishop g4. The knight could retreat back to d2, but then I figured I could just play queen h4, because the knight no longer guards it. The bishop can drop back to f1 to defend. Okay, the knight comes to e5. Well, now if f6, I lose the bishop. If I go queen h4, pawn g3, I don't think it's worth it. Taking makes no sense to me. So I think maybe bishop f5, but then maybe pawn f3. Okay, this is interesting. Perhaps pawn h5 is the way... Sorry, bishop h5 is the way to go. Just retreating and preparing pawn f6. And if the knight goes back to f3, I can always take it. Do I have any other options? Bishop f5, pawn f3 is a problem. If bishop h5, pawn f3, I can just drop back to f6. And if e4 is played... It's a move. It's an interesting move. Bishop h5, pawn f3, I can go to g5 to leave the option of pawn f6 open. However, pawn h4 looks kind of scary because I'm losing h7 with check. Okay, what happens if I do take? Well, I lose my best attacking piece. I also lose support for my knight because my rook is cut off. I also open up this bishop. So that all feels wrong. What happens if I go bishop f5, pawn f3? If I go bishop to e6? Pawn f3, knight f6. I think my bishop's just more passive. Can I ignore it? Is there a way for me to ignore it? To be fair, if queen h4, g3 is a move, but also knight g4 can be played, because the knight on g4 defends h2. And I have to take pawn f3. I do have queen h4? No, queen h5. Oh no, f3 isn't supported by anything. You can't play f3. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. I think bishop h5 makes sense. I don't think this can be a bad move. I don't think this can be a bad move. And I don't want to fall too far behind on the clock. If here, I mean, f6 should just win the knight, because the knight is pinned to the queen. If take, and something else, I don't know what else. Yeah, I feel like bishop g4 was wrong. Maybe I should have gone pawn f6 straight away. Yeah, that was probably better, wasn't it? I mean, I didn't want to go pawn f6 straight away because I blocked my queen. That was what turned me off of that move. But maybe it's just important to stop the knight from coming to e5. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. We'll check it with the engine after the game anyway, but I don't think this is bad. Maybe we've given away a bit of an advantage, but I think that we should still be equal, if not slightly better. Yeah, this knight is very annoying. He does take. Okay, well, taking here makes no sense. Let's take. Queen takes f6. Queen h4? Maybe that's the idea. Well, that's interesting. f6, queen h4, attacking the bishop. I missed that initially. If pawn takes knight, queen takes bishop. Pawn here looks bad. Yeah, this looks not good. I completely blanked on queen h4 because I thought my queen covered, but the pawn obviously blocks my queen's vision. Okay. Bishop g6 seems wrong because the queen just moves. Or even to f3, and then my bishop's under attack. Theoretically, I could actually take and go for an opposite-colored bishop position. That's not a bad shout, actually. Let's say bishop g6, queen f3, take, queen d2. We're down a pawn, but we have good play. Bishop d4. Yeah, he does have a bit of a monopoly over the dark squares. But after a move like rook e6, I think we're holding. I'm not sure how we win that position, but we can hold it. Okay, that's an option. That's an option. Again, can we make f6 work? f6, queen h4. Pawn takes, queen takes. If pawn takes, bishop takes, that looks horrific. Yeah, I think we have to go for this. If queen f4, then we can go pawn f6 because the knight is still pinned. Of course, if queen h4, we can take that with our queen. If queen g4, take. Maybe he can go pawn f4. Maybe you can go f4, f5 even. That's a possibility. But I think maybe we can just double up on the d file and try to infiltrate his second rank. Oh, sorry, the bishop goes to d4. No, that was the issue. Yeah, bishop d4 was the key move. Now, if rook can't go to b1 to defend the bishop if our queen lands on d2, I mean, you can go to a2, but that would hang this rook. The rook could go to e2, though, supported by the queen. That's true. Didn't consider that. Well, we'll see where he puts his queen, but it feels like f3 and g4 are the only viable options. I'm not sure where else you'd put it. Again, you can't go to f4. You can't go on this diagonal, obviously, because you lose your queen. So I guess he's deciding between these two moves. h4 would also hang the queen. Now, do we have other options, though? Because after queen g4, we don't have to take the knight. We're not forced to take the knight. We could do something else. For example, we could try to be aggressive with pawn f5. Now, I don't think that works, but we could play it. I was thinking whether there was a way of playing f6. Like, for example, let's say like queen f3, pawn f6, knight g6, hg6. And maybe we can go for some king f7, rook h8 sort of thing. Now, I don't think it works, to be honest. But it's interesting trying to continue attacking. We may just have to go into an opposite colour bishop position and play for what is effectively a draw. I'm very annoyed about playing bishop to g4. f6 looks fantastic. Although, having said that, f6, knight h4... No, knight h4 doesn't do anything. I can just go f5, yeah. So f6 here, what does white play? Knight d2? Knight d2, I guess. And if bishop f5, pawn f3 is a problem. If pawn f5, knight back. Maybe even like g5 and being super aggressive. Although I suppose he can always come to e5. Yeah, this is a well-supported knight, as we are seeing now. Bonan's still thinking. I mean, he's got time to think, so that's understandable. This is probably a crucial moment in the game. But it does, you know, seem like he's only choosing between two moves. I mean, oh my god. Didn't mean to pre-move that. Although that wouldn't be a terrible pre-move. I mean, knight g6 can't be played. You just lose the queen, obviously. I mean, I don't really know what else can be played other than queen g4 or queen f3. And he does go queen f3, okay. So the question is, do we take or do we not? Because if pawn f6, he doesn't even have to take the bishop. He can come to c4. And I really don't like that position. I think I'm just going to take. This feels like the easiest solution. So, okay, what happens if queen d2, rook e2? If queen e2, I can just play rook a d8. If bishop to d4, it looks drawish. So queen d2, rook d... Oh my god. Queen d2, rook e2. Queen d5 offering a queen trade looks wrong. Maybe I can try and be sneaky with a move like queen h4. Because if rook d1, then I have bishop h5 with a skewer. Queen here, 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 here. Take, bishop e4, pawn f3, bishop d5, pawn e4, bishop e6, pawn f4, pawn g6, pawn g4. No, the pawn on g4 is hanging. That's possible. Yeah, let's go queen h4. I like that. Also freeing up the d8 square for a rook. who is, of course, better suited to the job of infiltrating because it's less valuable, whereas the queen gets kicked out by a rook very easily. E6 we just take, of course, that's easy. We could put a rook here in the future, or even the bishop on e6 in the future, like I was describing with the line I was calculating just now, where the bishop comes around, where it would defend d7, it would potentially defend f5, stop any advancement. Probably not that big a deal, but, you know. We do have a majority on the queen side. We have a 3 versus 2. Bishop d4. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Bishop e4, queen g3. Queen takes, h takes. I mean, the dead draw. The dead draw. We just set up on the light squares and we draw. Can we go for anything else? I suppose we could go rook d8. Which, again, we're trying to bait him into losing the exchange. Where, even in that position, it might be a draw. But only we can win that. I mean, I don't think he's going to blunder it. But, I mean, this can't be... Oh my god, really? What am I missing? Excuse me? What am I missing? Pawn g3 doesn't work, because take and take. And after rook takes, we actually have rook e5. Oh, it might be winning with the inclusion of rook e5. Ooh. Come on now. Come on. This is why I didn't go for queen d2 or go for some immediate draw, because regardless of what happens, if my opponent plays well and plays decent moves and doesn't fall for traps, it's going to be a draw, right? He's up a pawn, opposite colored bishops. His extra pawn isn't impressive anyway. He's not winning with it unless he makes some mad attack happen, but I wasn't really concerned about that. But yeah, this looks winning now because, I mean, the main reason is because I think I have rook takes e5. And of course, if bishop takes, I take the rook. And now I'm not up an exchange. Sorry, I don't have a rook for a bishop and a pawn, but I have a whole rook for a bishop. Now, again, it's still very hard to break through this because he just has a dark squared monopoly, which makes this very hard. But we can certainly try. I can't kick this bishop away. I need to open lines, so a5 is probably a line I need to open up. So let's go rook d5. The 5th rank is important. If he goes bishop c5, I of course trade the rooks, and then I infiltrate and I win. He can't allow that. And now the majority on the queen side is looking very, very nice. Now, again, it's very hard for me to break because of his control over the dark squares. Okay, if pawn a5... Ah, his idea is bishop b6, but rook d1 doesn't come with check. But it doesn't work, though. Because after a5, bishop b6, rook d1, if you take my rook, I take your rook. And then I take on b4, and rook versus bishop is game over. Yeah. So if a5 and you... Oh, it's a point a5 take, rook take, then bishop b6. That's the point. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, maybe I just slow play this. No, I don't need to play f5. He's not playing e4. Maybe I can just go f6 and bring the king. Maybe I can just bring the king all the way over here. While you may be tempted to play f5, g6 and put all the pawns on light squares, I don't actually want to put all the pawns on light squares because while they're not targets for his bishop, they also give his bishop free movement if all my pawns are on light squares, right? So I do want a few pawns on dark squares to limit the movement of his bishop. Okay, I have this whenever I want it. Not too sure what king h2 is doing. I think my opponent is essentially just trying to shuffle and do nothing. Oh, he's trying to make sure this doesn't come with a pin. Okay, but I can still play it. I thought that was the whole issue. Oh, he has rook e2. Rook e2 feels flimsy. Let's go for it. Of course, if you take my rook, I take your rook. And if you take my other rook, then I'll take back. And rook versus bishop is just... It should be completely winning. So rook e2 is what I'm expecting, avoiding the trade. But then I was going to go rook 8 to d5, threatening rook h5, checkmate. And after pawn g4, you know, pawn g5, and maybe there's some weaknesses to exploit. This is still very hard, though. It's still very hard to win this. If rook to f1, there's pawn to e4, and the bishop defends. He's trying to set up a dark square blockade, obviously. But his king is extremely passive, and he does still have weaknesses in his position. And it might get to a point where I sacrifice my rook for a bishop and a pawn and just throw the c-pawn down the board. So something like king c4, bishop c5, rook b1, and then I play something like take, 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 and just throw the pawn down. That might be the plan. Okay, pawn g4. Rook f1, pawn f3. I don't really gain anything. So king c4, forcing bishop c5. I think this is the way to go. So let's say here, here. Take, take, take. Here. Here, here. Take, take. Push, push. I'm losing. Gotta be careful then. I do have to be careful. Does king d3 do anything? King g3? Not really sure what I'm accomplishing. Rook d5. Pawn f4. The reason I'm saying pawn f4 is because he needs to go for this to create a passed pawn. g5... No, that's too risky. That's too risky. Maybe I can go g6, f5? I don't know. Rook here, pawn f4. I don't have to take, though. I can come back. Like, king d3, king g3, king e4. And the white position feels uncomfortable. Now, if f4 isn't played, I think I win. So let's say king g3 is played. Take, take, take. f4 is going to have to be played at some point. c5, e4, c4, e5, take, take. Okay, now he goes f4, but now I change plans. I think the idea is to provoke that. And now I'm trying to give him two weaknesses. Maybe f5 is strong. Ooh, f5 looks kind of strong. I think I'm okay now. f5 looked interesting, though, gluing my pawns to the dark squares and trying to come after them. Now I'm not sure it works. Let's go g6. f5. There's two weaknesses. And I'm trying to put my opponent in some kind of Zugzwang, essentially, where his bishop will have like one square where he can defend both pawns, and either I can get to a position where I can sack the rook for a bishop and a pawn, or he just doesn't have any moves to defend everything, essentially. Okay, well, f5 looks viable. I don't really see a reason not to play it. Like, this pawn on f5 effectively controls all three of his pawns, which looks quite powerful. Now, if take-take, he can try and come around, but I always have rook h1 to defend the h7 pawn if I need it, so I'm not too concerned. Let's take. King h4. Can you get away with that? Okay, king f2. Check here. Maybe I... No, that's wrong. How do I do this? Maybe I want to go rook e2 and sacrifice the rook like this for a Zugzwang where the king has to give me the f4 pawn. That's interesting. That's really interesting. Okay, so let's say king g3, rook e2. King h3, rook e1. King g3, take, take, take. King h4, king f4, that should be winning. If rook c2, king h3, rook e2, pawn g3. Can you go for that? I don't think so. After take, take, take. If pawn g4, I take on f4. If king h4, I go king f3. If king g2, however, pawn h5, king back to h3, king to f3, king to h4. Now I'm in Zugzwang. Huh. I'm not sure what the solution is. Now, I do get 10 extra seconds every move, so, you know, we can play this position out for a while. The white king is never going to be a threat. We can figure out how we're going to accomplish the win. Maybe we want to trade these pawns off. Maybe that's the way to go. Rook here, king here. Take, take, take. I think that's winning. So let's see if he goes for it. I'm expecting g3, though. Well, no, if g3, king f3, and he's getting mated. King h4. Okay, rook g1. f5's well guarded. g4, I just take it, of course. Which is why I didn't play rook e2, because g4 looks scary. g3. Okay. Rook g2, king h3. Oh, wait, sorry, no. Now's the time for king f3. But if king f3, king g5, this pawn's a problem. Wait, am I mating him? Ooh. Wait, I think h6 is winning. Because rook h1 is mate. So he has to escape somehow. And king h5 looks like the only move to escape to g6. After king h5, if I go rook h1, king g6... Well, he always takes this if he wants it. But I thought I could play take and take. 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 If king g6, I take the pawn. If king here, I go king here. And that's a winning position. I'm sure that's winning. That's a very typical... what's the word? Like tactic almost. It's white to move, which makes it losing. I'm sure this wins. I mean, he has to take back, of course. If he doesn't, we'll still win the endgame. So here, here, here. He has to defend the pawn with king g5. Otherwise, I take the pawn. And then after king e4, he has to abandon the defense of the pawn. And then I take the pawn, and then I win. If he runs after my queenside pawns, he's just going to run out of time. Yeah, it's going to take way too long to do that. I think this is game over. This has been a very interesting game. Very, very interesting game. And yeah, I mean, he doesn't have to take the rook. Sure, he doesn't have to take it. But if he doesn't, he's going to lose anyway. Oh, that's a tricky move. So if here, he has this. And then I think he might be able to hold that. That's quite interesting. However, here. Wait, can I just go for this? And now the king has to move, and then I can play take, and then I win. So I assume he wants to move the bishop then. So let's say bishop d6, and we continue. He's fighting on. And we still need to figure out how we're going to get through this. And I'm also low on time, so I can't take too long about my moves. Again, I'm trying to create two weaknesses. Or play on the two weaknesses. Now I think he's in Zugzwang. Because if he moves the king, I win f4. The bishop doesn't have access to either of the squares it needs to go to defend f4. If the bishop moves... Oh, maybe you can just move the bishop. Wow, this is... How is this holding? How do I win this? Yeah, bishop b6 looks fine. Maybe I can move my king. But what if his king just stays around attacking this pawn? Then what do I do? Dunno. I think my king needs to be on e4 to defend and attack. Yeah, this pawn structure is so difficult because I just can't break through with my pawns even though I have the majority. So I'm going to put a rook and a pawn for a bishop. It should be winning though. It should still be winning. I'm trying to figure out the way to break through. I think bishop b6. Wait, what's wrong with bishop b6? Is anything wrong with bishop b6? Rook d1? No. Rook d2. Bishop b6, rook d2. Maybe I can force the king away from the defense of the pawn. I'm still stopping bishop d6. I thought he had to come over here so that he could come to c7. If bishop h6... Bishop h6... Probably rook b2 wins. Bishop's got to come back to f8. This is what I mean. 2 weaknesses, and we should win eventually. Now I give this check and win the pawn. The bishop can't do everything at once. Again, it's a case of Zugzwang. I don't know whether there was a way for white to hold, but I don't think so. My rook can always come to g7 to defend, or to h7, it doesn't really matter. And other than that, I can just start pushing. And this is now game over. Wow. That took a while, didn't it? That took a while, but hopefully this was really educational and instructive for you guys. Like, we didn't play perfectly out of the opening. I think we probably got ourselves a drawn position when we maybe could have gone for more. The opening itself seemed very, very good, though. And then, yeah, we managed to get our opponent in a trap and eventually find a way to win the game, which took a long time and a lot of technique, but I think it was pretty damn accurate. So anyway, let's jump into the analysis and see what the engine has to say. Okay, so 87.6% accuracy for my opponent, 93.0 for us. I'm correct in saying the opening was pretty damn perfect. So we have a semi-slav, which went to perfection. Bishop d6, bishop d3, knight bd7, normal development. Now, e4 can be played immediately, which is what I was hinting at. And after something like take, 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 we can go for the immediate e5. And that's what I was saying with bishop to d6. And, you know, if white goes for a bunch of trades, firstly, we can take and just allow this exchange. It's not a big deal. Or we can go for queen a5 first, bishop d2, queen e5. And we just have a good position. You know, we just have a good position. So e5 is a big idea. Anyway, my opponent castles again. If e4, take, 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 e5, same idea. And the game can open up very quickly and look to be something like this. Apparently this is a move. Oh, that's interesting. And then you can pick this up, but we also have opposite colored bishops, so it's probably a draw. But my opponent took on d5, which really surprised me. Because after we take back, we're just better. My opponent went rook e1, I went rook e8, and I thought for the life of me he was going to go e4. And have something like d e4, knight e4, knight e4, bishop e4, knight f6, bishop c2, rook e1, queen e1, bishop g4 looks good to me. And something along these lines. I thought this is what he was going to go for. But he went a3, which is a mistake because of knight e4, which is the best move. And the knight's untouchable. If you take with a knight, then you get forked, obviously. And if you take the bishop, then I take back. Your knight gets kicked away. And the white position is just really suffocated. You know? It's really suffocated. If you try to break out of f3, then I feel like you're creating way too many weaknesses in the position. I mean, we just dominate the e4 square, so e3 is a backwards pawn blocking the development of this bishop. So he went queen c2, which is the best move. Knight d to f6 is the best response. The engine recommends knight e5, just giving up a pawn, which is ridiculous in my opinion. b4, I mean, come on now. Why would he give up a pawn? He goes b4 immediately. I took on c3, which is the best move. Knight e4 is the best move. Queen c2. Again, if bishop takes, that's just no good. d4, knight d2, and I have a roaring attack. You don't have a bishop to put on f1 anymore, so this is a bishop to g4 and bishop to f3 is a major threat, so queen c4 needs to be played to come back to f1 at some point. But queen c2 is a good move. a6 is inaccurate. Okay, so a6 is wrong. I saw bishop f5. I thought this was risky because we were lining this up. The best move is rook e6, a move I briefly considered and quickly discarded because I thought the rook was just blocking my bishop. If bishop b2, rook h6... Sorry. Oh, this is interesting. Because even if the knight comes to e5, queen h4, h3, I can probably just take. And this looks lost for white. Yeah. I'm just threatening take, and mate. Wow. Or obviously mate here. Which I probably should have prefaced with. So a6 is too slow, which allows bishop b2, and bishop g4 is the mistake. Yes, okay. So, again, rook e6 is better. And after knight e5, rook h6, pawn g3 has to be played to stop the queen from infiltrating. But I am better still. And if you take, and take, then f6 does win. Because there's no attacking a bishop on h5 like what happened in the game. Or what would have happened in the game. So bishop g4 is wrong because of knight e5. Now everything else is winning except knight e5. Here bishop h5 is inaccurate. Better is bishop back to c8. But like, that's so disheartening to just admit that you're completely wrong. Now after take, f6 does work because my bishop isn't a target on h5 though. So bishop h5, bishop e4, d4, queen e4. Again, I rejected f6 because of queen h4 only move, counter-attacking. And if I take, then after take, I didn't like this position. The engine thinks e4 and maybe you can hold, but I'm down a pawn with with same color bishops. So it's, you know, pretty tough to defend this. So bishop g6 is what I went for. The computer prefers pawn h6, which I can't explain. Also likes queen g5, which I considered, but I thought pawn f4 was an issue. And it is one of the best moves. This is what I saw in the game. And I was like, well, I'm just going to have to retreat the queen anyway. And what have I gained? That question. So bishop g6 is what I went for. Queen f3. Bishop e5 is inaccurate, really. Pawn a5. And if take, here take. Wait, why wouldn't you take with the bishop? Queen e7 is strong, and if take. Can you go e4? No, sorry, that hangs d4. e4 to defend this, but d4 hangs. And the engine thinks this is drawing, because if a4, we just double up. And we win the pawn back. And if anything, I think black's better with the outside passed pawn. I didn't see that, though. I took and went queen h4, setting a trap. The engine thinks that white is +1, but I think it's hard to prove. I think it's hard to prove with opposite colored bishops. I rejected queen d2 because of rook e2 or bishop d4. In both cases, my queen is pointless. So queen h4, bishop d4. a5 is the move the engine wants. I went rook a to d8, trying to bait him into bishop b6 so I can infiltrate somehow. But my opponent blundered. Bishop h5, and blunders further by offering a queen trade. Not queen f4. Queen f5 is the best move. Because after take, he keeps queens on the board, which is better. Wait, what's wrong with rook e6? That looks very natural to me. The engine prefers rook d5. Oh, same effect, yeah. It's more active. The queen g3 allows a queen trade, a rook trade, and then rook e5. And rook e5 is the key move. Oh, okay, yeah, this is why trading the queens is bad. Because rook e5 is the major issue. In this position, if I were to play, I don't know, pawn g6, then the game is drawn after rook c1 because I actually can't infiltrate properly. The extra pawn is a big deal. It's a really big deal. Like, I don't know, pawn f4 and just everything defends each other. All the files are blocked. After rook e5, though, there is play. Rook c1, rook ed5. My opponent went rook e1. I went f6, king h2, king f7. The engine suggests the immediate a5. Yeah, here I have rook here, but I thought he could take, and if take, there's this. Oh, sorry, now I throw in... Oh, now I throw the check in. Ah, okay, this is a much easier win. Okay, I missed that. Okay, bishop b6, rook d1, take, take. I thought he was going to go rook here, and I was going to go rook d5. But I can actually just go rook d2, which forces a rook trade. If rook d5, pawn g4, it's best just to force the rook trade, which after g4 I probably would have seen, or I like to think I would have seen. Anyway, he trades, pawn a4, king e6, pawn a5, king d5, pawn g4. And I was trying to see, can I take? And I figured no. I thought this was bad because of e4. And if I start pushing, I thought this was a draw. It isn't. If I push, it is. But I have to go king b5, getting in the square of the pawn. Then I stop the pawn, and then I win. Because his king's too far away. But I couldn't calculate it fully. So I went for this instead. And I felt like this was winning anyway. Which it is. But maybe... Sorry, I was just killing a mosquito. If you're wondering why my arm was flailing about. g6, bishop c5. Yeah, and we're just slowly figuring the position out. I was trying to get to a position where I can take here. And after take, you have to move the king away from the defense of the pawn. That's what I was going for. But my opponent must have seen that, and he went the other way. Pawn g3, h6 is the best move. And this forces king h5, which allows me to go for this position. And rook e3 is the best move, because if take, king g5 defending the pawn, king e4 defending my pawn, attacking this pawn, you have to move the king away. I take, and I just promote. So my opponent doesn't take. He goes king g5. Rook c3, bishop d6, rook d3, bishop c5. And I'm trying to find a way through. I thought bishop b6 was the most accurate move here. And after rook d2, bishop c7. And after rook d... Oh, I have rook d4. Ah, okay. That's what I missed. And now you can't defend. That's why you didn't go for it then. Went bishop f8. And there's just too many weaknesses. There's two weaknesses. And you can't defend both forever. So bishop f8, rook d2, bishop h6, rook b2, forcing the bishop back, giving the check, winning the pawn, and this is, of course, game over, and my opponent resigns after a few more moves. That's a very interesting endgame, rook versus bishop like that. It's all about creating multiple weaknesses. That's really all it comes down to, is multiple weaknesses. And, you know, even though I didn't see the exact win from this position, I felt like eventually there would be a way to either sack the rook for the f-pawn and the bishop, which would be winning, or win one of the pawns outright, which is what eventually happened. Because the bishop, the only way for the bishop to defend both pawns is to be either on d2 or d6. So as long as I sit on the d file, which is exactly what I did, then the bishop can't defend both pawns, right? It would be a different story if, let's say, I don't know, this pawn was on f2 and the bishop could sit on c5 and guard both pawns while being defended. Then maybe there's more of a game there. Maybe it's harder, although again, I'd probably sacrifice at the appropriate moment. But here, yeah, it's very difficult, and we eventually win. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully I've given a good taste of the semi-Slav defense. And again, I'm bit frustrated with my bishop g4 move. That was a very silly move, allowing knight e5. I should have seen that. But the opening itself was pretty perfect. Anyways, if you want to see another very interesting game in the Slav Defense, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of this climb to 2200 Rapid, check out the playlist down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.